Good afternoon, everybody. This is the October meeting of the Indivisible Group Progressive Legacy. Thank you all for joining us for an exciting program. Today, we're going to hear from Commissioner Sam Statland on the work of the Montgomery County Redistricting Commission, and later from a candidate for Montgomery Council at Large, Brandi Brooks. So without further ado, I want to introduce Sam Statland, known to all of us, who has been appointed to the Redistricting Commission. Commissioner Statland, please.
Well, hi, everybody. It's such a pleasure to be back at Leisure World. I've been here many times in the past in various capacities and even have friends that live there. It's a great community. And thank you guys for letting me make this presentation to you. The purpose of our commission, of course, well, let's go to the next slide, Alan.
Let's see. No, well, yeah, let's get it together.
So everyone, as you know, beginning in 2022, Montgomery County is going to change. It's going to change from the 5 districts that you see here to 7. And the new districts are going to be based on the current 2020 population census, which we received about a month ago. And the county charter requires redistricting every 10 years. And the last one was approved in 2011. Next slide, please. So our mission is to recommend to the county council 7 districts, and the districts have to be equal in population. There are approximately 150,000 residents now in the 7 districts. We're changing from 5 districts of 200,000 people, 7 districts of 150,000. So obviously the existing districts will be smaller, and we'll add 2 new districts. And the districts have to be compact areas of land, and they have to take into consideration ethnic and racial groups. We must identify those groups to diminish so that we don't diminish their rights by either packing those populations in a single district or splitting them in a manner that dilutes their impact on elections. And you all know that all the court battle that's going on in Georgia right now over this very issue, and as well as Tennessee and other states. Next slide, please.
Oops, come on.
So these are our ground rules. Equal population, it's part of the 14th Amendment. Compact, having a minimum distance between all parts of a district. Contiguous, that they must be connected at some point. That the consideration of minority populations, majority minority populations. I like to say persons of color, jurisdictions, and preservation of county and other political subdivisions. So we're not going to cross a county or city line or a town hall or boundaries when drawing these maps, and we're going to preserve communities of interest. Leisure World is a great example of a community of interest. So you will all be in the same district, as will neighborhoods of a city or regions of the state. You know, Chevy, next slide, please. This talks to the census, that this issue has been resolved. Next slide, please. This is what you guys can do to help right now and how you can participate right now. This week, in fact, this particular presentation is the last one from our out. And we've made this presentation 35 times across the county. Tremendous amount of public input has come in. There is a page on our website, a drop down on the left-hand side where we're accepting public comment. And I urge you, if you have something that you want to put on the record, to go to the website, get a hold of that drop down box and complete it. It's very important. And tomorrow night, folks, tomorrow night, write this down, at 5 p.m. is our next meeting of the Redistricting Commission. And at that, we will show 3 maps that have been drawn by subcommittees within the county, and our subcommittees, of course, have been appointed by the county council. And I think they did a great job in selecting the members of this commission, because we're very, very reflective of the residents and voting population of the county politically, as well as racially and socioeconomically. 4 commissioners are Republicans. 4 commissioners are Democrats. 2 commissioners are Republican. 4 commissioners are independent. 1 is a libertarian and 1 is a member of the Green Party. And we're very, very reflective of the citizens of Montgomery County, and have worked really, really well in an open and fair process to draw what we think are just going to be terrific maps. I encourage you to go to our presentation, which is a live commission meeting, 5 o'clock tomorrow. It's on Facebook. All you have to do is Google, Montgomery County Redistricting Commission Facebook. It'll take you to the page. You don't have to be a member of Facebook to draw the page. Next slide, please. So what I'm going to show you are some just eye-opening views of Montgomery County going back to 1990. Shows you the changes of Montgomery County and what we've taken into consideration in drawing these maps. Next slide, please. So our population from 2010 to 2020 has grown by 90,000 people. And in fact, in the last month or so, we've grown by approximately 3,000 people. And forecast, if you run the numbers, the increase between 2020 and 2030 will probably exceed 100,000 people. Next slide, please. Folks moving into the county are coming from these regions of the world. And this is their countries of origin. So I'm not going to read the numbers to you, but you can see that the Latino community has grown by 40%, and the people from Africa, the African continent, have grown by 16%, Asians by 36%, Europeans by 7.8%. Next slide, please. It's quite obvious that from 2000 to 2020, the last 20 years, the non-Hispanic white population, us white guys, has gone down from almost 60% to a little over 40%. And during that period of time, you can see that the Hispanic population has grown from 11.5% to 20.5%. The Asian community has grown from 14, almost 15% to 18%. And Asian and Pacific Islanders have grown from 11% to over 15%. Next slide, please. This shows you where we live by population, by place. So as you can see, the most population within the county goes from approximately Rockville down to Silver Spring and the borders with the District of Columbia. And the next concentrations move up the county, Gaithersburg, Rockville, and a strong growth now going towards Clarksburg. We're following that 2 line. Next slide, please. Alan, next slide, please. So this shows you growth by place, which is very similar to growth by where people are living. And as you can see, the biggest concentration, it's hard to believe this, but Silver Spring, Bethesda, Chevy Chase, parts of Rockville, parts of the mid-eastern county, Wheaton, Glenmont, going up through Gaithersburg, Rockville, and up to Clarksburg. You can see where all this growth is taking place. Next slide, please. I think you'll find this slide interesting, guys. The big circles show where the median age of the total population is by age. And obviously, from 67 to age 79 are the largest concentrations. And one is a specific large growth area of aging people, and it's Leisure World. Welcome. Thank you all. You guys get your own special square. Next slide, please. Tract sizes are different. The larger they are, the less populated they are. The wider they are and less dense, the farther up county. There's less racial predominance down county and in eastern and along the I-270 corridor. And we're just becoming much more diverse with no racial predominance. And the tracts are becoming more people of color. Next slide, please. Guys, these next three slides are blow my mind, actually. I think that they're really just incredible. This shows you 1990. Folks, this is 30 years ago, 1990. And the dark blue area shows where the predominant population is white citizens. And then the gray box shows you where it's still predominantly white citizens, up to 70%. And those yellow boxes show you where there's no predominant population of race. Next slide, please. Guys, this is 10 years later. And you can see that the white populations are decreasing as the people of color are increasing. Next slide, please.
Wow.
This is what the census is based upon. Just look at this. Just look at this. The white population is basically ag preserve and up in the parts of the county towards Howard and Frederick County, down in Chevy Chase, Bethesda, into Potomac. That green area that you see represents African-American communities. The yellow area is no plurality of anyone. Next slide, please. This shows you where towns are within our map. And we're not going to divide these towns. They're all communities of interest. You know, Poolsville on the left, Germantown towards the center. I believe that's to the right is Alney. You see Rockville and Gaithersburg in the middle, Silver Springs, all the towns and communities throughout Chevy Chase. Next slide, please. This shows you the predominant racial or ethnic groups within the county based on census tracts. So you can see what you can see from this where there is predominance of where racial balance and ethnic balance starts to meld together more or less. Next slide, please. So the summary is that obviously the over age 65 population is up and rising, but the under 5 population is slowing because there are slower birth rates. And the younger population that we have, I don't know if any of you have been to, an elementary, middle, or high school, but the younger population, our children and our grandchildren, are more diverse. They're friends. They visit each other's homes, which we tended not to do when we were kids. There's an increasing diversity, but we do have geographic segregation along racial lines, and income and race are correlated. For example, I live in Rock Creek Hills, and in Rock Creek Hills and a lot of communities throughout Montgomery County in the 50s, African Americans and people and Jewish people could not move into Rock Creek Hills. Our covenants prohibited. We were excluded. And that is true throughout a lot of areas of the county. And of course, you can extend that, and the way real estate was sold, realtors were not showing pieces of property to Hispanic and Black and Jewish people and people who were discriminated against. And that leads to, the economics of diversification within the county, and again, a concentration of money. So the Brookings Institute long ago in the 90s did a study where they drew a line from the White House up 16th Street, and continuing along the park, up Connecticut Avenue, more or less. And the haves were on the left side and the have-nots were on the right side. And that has pretty much been that way for a long, long time, but it is changing. And a really good example and reason for that is because as immigrants come into the county, they come in with very little English background, as my parents did, and I'm sure some of your parents did. They lived in ghettos, they lived in tight communities. Then as they learned English and assimilated, and we all went to school, people were able to get better jobs, start small businesses, open small businesses, and buy homes, which was always the American dream. So just take a look, if you're coming down Randolph Road, for example, down George Avenue, take a right on Randolph, that area in there going over to Veers Mill Road on both sides was pretty much a low rent area, lots of rental properties, people sharing homes. But if you look at it today, those homes are individually owned, properties are in great shape, many additions have been made. People are becoming more affluent. And that's happening all over the county, East County, Clarksburg, where land costs are lower and people have the opportunity to purchase more homes. Next slide, please. So that brings me back to where we started. I encourage you, please, tomorrow night, 5 o'clock, Google Redistricting Commission, and you will see the maps live. There'll be 3 maps presented live. There'll be a very vigorous discussion. Those maps will get winnowed down to probably 2 maps. And on the 20th, we'll hold a public hearing, which is your next input to sign up to testify. And we are following the rules of Montgomery County. For the most part, our meetings are going to be closed, of course, and 50 people will be allowed to testify. I don't know whether or not that program has been set yet, but if you feel compelled to testify, do so quickly. And again, thank you for allowing me to show you these slides. I find them to be most interesting and educational. They were to me putting the stuff together. So Alan, if you can turn the presentation off or hold it in abeyance in case we have to reference back to them, I'd appreciate it. And let's have some questions and I'll be glad to answer whatever questions you have.
I see an area that is, what is it, Oriental? Not Oriental.
Asian.
Yeah,
Asian.
there are Asian American population.
A majority right near Rockville.
A plurality.
A plurality, yes.
To use the term plurality because there is no dominant group in any one of our proposed districts, but there are pluralities where the majority may be Latin, Latino, African American, Asian Pacifics, etc.
Right. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Is the commission considering placement of Afghan refugees in Montgomery County?
No, everything is based on the 2020 census.
I see.
Where that does come into play a little bit, and a very little bit, is when you look at the plurality of a given district, and that district has a high propensity to have more immigration, more people moving into it, then over short periods of time, the majority vote in those districts will definitely become favorable to that particular group. And that is part of our consideration in developing maps, because the areas that you see with the least amount of population will fill in, of course, and population will be increased.
Okay.
This commission is very important because these maps that we're drawing today will set the tone for the county socioeconomically. at least for the next 10 to 20 years, until we get big enough where we might want to change, the system of electing council members. So this will have a lasting impact on all of us for a long, long time. And that's why us commissioners really wanted to join. I mean, there was, I don't know, something like 50 or 60 applicants. You can see it on our website. You can go to our website, and on our website, there's just a ton of information that answers an awful lot of questions and leads to, and there's backgrounds on the commissioners. And of course, it leads to the really nice balance that we have and our abilities to work together, which is kind of nice. And because of the mix of parties, no party, for the first time that I can ever remember, and I've been involved in politics in Montgomery County since the 70s, Democrats don't have a majority, Republicans, independents, nobody has a majority. So you definitely have to cross the aisle to vote on maps to get them to the county council, which is why I also hope that the county council will accept our map and not draw another one. By the 20th, we will, around the 20th, 21st, we will submit our maps ahead of time, actually, to the county council. At that point in time, they have to have their own public hearing within 30 days. This is by statute. And then they have two choices. They can accept the maps that we've presented, which we hope they will, or they can draw their own maps. They have then 90 days to get a map approved. Well, if you figure that out, you got November, December, January. It could be January before a map would be approved, that you following that system. Meanwhile, guys, we have people running for the county council seats. They don't know what district they're in. However, the advice that we're giving to anyone running in district for office is open up your committee, start gathering your supporters in, start raising your money, and work from where you live out. But I'm so pleased to say that if candidates go to our website tomorrow at 5 o'clock, they will get a pretty good idea of where these districts are, because our maps are very, very similar in design, and they'll get a feeling for it, which puts pressure, of course, on the county council to get these maps done as quickly as possible, or get the map approved as quickly as possible, which is what we're all saying little prayers for before we go to bed every night. Questions?
Let's take a
Yes.
couple more questions.
Sure.
Who's got a
Brandy?
question? Brandy, go ahead.
Great, thanks, Sam. I was curious, since you talk about the racial equity focus areas and you talk about, kind of protecting the votes of populations of people of color, what does that mean specifically in terms of how it influences the way that you shape your maps?
As a basic premise, it means is that we as a group are not discriminating against anybody. Therefore, the maps that are going to be drawing are going to be equal, fair, and transparent, and give every citizen the opportunity to run for office on an even playing field. That really is the bottom essence of it. And they're designed where people of all groups have a chance to run for office or have the opportunity. And I'll add to that, as you know, we have publicly funded candidates, and the purpose of Montgomery County being the first district to have publicly funded candidates was to give people the opportunity to receive matching dollars from the county based on a formula and percentages. So it further opens the basic underlying principles of the county, which for the most part, although improving every day, I say a prayer for more equality and opportunity. I think it's just wonderful, really. Have we done a great job all the way across the board? Absolutely not. I can, not only do I remember my covenants, but I remember attending, third grade in DC, and 1954, which was the first year of integration. and going to that school and seeing people yelling and screaming on both sides of the issue. And I said, Mom, what's going on? Keeping in mind that I was like all of 6 or 7 years old. And my mother gave me some great advice. She said, go to school like you always do, make friends, and everything will work out. And it did all through my high school career, making great friends that I have till this day. And well, that was until a friend of mine got me involved in the Kennedy campaign. And as most of you know, in living in DC, we did not have the right to vote for the President of the United States. And we moved to Montgomery County, where we did have the right to vote for the president. Luckily, things changed. And I know you might not like hearing this, but my hero through all this, believe it or not, was Marion Barry. You know, I can totally appreciate the problem he had, you know, with his own individual demons. However, it was Marion Barry that went to Lyndon Johnson, and Lyndon Johnson agreed with Marion Barry to only appoint one commissioner in the District of Columbia, and that was Walter Washington, which led to the DC having home rule, which to me was a big, big deal, a very, very big deal. Sorry to be so long-winded on that.
Just
Anyway,
one last question from me, then we're going to switch to our other guest. As you looked over all of the comments that you received from residents, were they predominantly from white areas of the county or from communities of color on the east side of the county? Where did most of the public input come from?
we've made this presentation and people are aware of our commission. Last time I counted, there were over 50, probably now over 60 comments. They came across the county from every group that you can think of. And the best part to me is I think 2 or 3 citizens actually submitted their own maps, which we all looked at. And we all read the comments and it became part of the process.
Les, did you think that that order of magnitude of 50 to 60 comments was sufficient to for community comment, or should we have been expecting several hundred as opposed to less than 100?
Well, I said early on during a commission meeting, I wanted to have 1,000 people, 100,000 people out of 1 million, that's only 10%, to participate in this process. Because the one thing that I don't want to hear, which I know we're going to hear, is I didn't know this was going on.
Mhm.
People involved in politics, that happens all the time. I think we did a really good job trying to avoid that. And I'll let you guys in on a little secret. Not everybody's going to be happy. That's expected. And we're not trying to make everyone happy. What we're trying to do is equality, fairness, and openness. So I've rented an 11-bedroom apartment downtown at a secret address and invited my fellow commissioners to stay there for a month. Oh, and it's bulletproof, by the way, just in case we need a place to hide out.
I have to say, thank you very much, Sam Statland. That was wonderful.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very
you.
Thank
much.
Have a great. Can I stay for the next segment for a few minutes? Do you mind?
Absolutely.
Just listen. I'll even
Absolutely.
mute my microphone.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you for that interesting presentation. Our
Yes.
next guest is Brandi Brooks. Brandi has announced her candidacy for Montgomery Council member at large, and she's been running an ambitious, aggressive, active campaign, which has been going on for several months now. She's got a lot of grassroots support, and she's been all over presenting her vision for the future to diverse audiences around the county. So without further ado, let me introduce Brandi Brooks, a friend to all of us, who will tell us about her vision for Montgomery County. Brandi.
Thank you so much, Alan, and good evening to everyone. It's wonderful to see a number of familiar faces on this call, and also to get to see a lot of you that I haven't had a chance to connect with yet. So it's such a pleasure to be here. Again, my name is Brandi Brooks. I use she, her pronouns. I live in Kensington, just a little bit west of the Wheaton Mall, and I am a renter, a housing justice activist, someone who's been involved for a long time in environmental and social justice work. The work that I currently do in my day job is actually doing consulting around participatory processes, getting community members involved in actually shaping public policy, especially around environmental justice and racial equity. And I have been an organizer and a trainer and someone who's deeply been invested in civic engagement for a long time. So, you know, one of the things that I love about y'all's group, about Progressive Legacy, is the fact that this is another group of folks who for a long time have been engaged with your community, have been engaged in the political space and trying to figure out how we shape that political space toward the things that we want to achieve for ourselves and our loved ones and our communities. And that's actually where I want to start this evening. I want to do something a little bit different because a lot of candidates will come and say, you know, here's my vision for what this county should be like. And I am going to talk about that. But where I actually want to start is to have a couple of folks share with me at the outset, when you think about what your vision is for Montgomery County, the things that you want for yourself and your loved ones in your community, what's your vision? What are some of the things that are really important to you? And I'd love to have a couple of people speak. You can also share things in the chat just to hear about your visions.
I have to say, one of the most important things we can have is affordable housing. That's a very, very big one on my list.
Excellent. Okay, so affordable housing, people really being able to afford to live in our county. For other folks, what's part of your vision for the county?
I like the activism.
Excellent schools.
Okay, so we've got excellent schools from a friend on the phone. And then Hank, what was your?
I would say the activism. I mean, we have an incredibly good and very condensed group here. And Alan has been a great leader in setting us up to have these events so that we can be more aware of what is going on in our area. And I think that is something that you can't see. He came in and he took us and he made us into something bigger than we were. And I like that. And I like the activism of other individuals in our group who go out and make sure that we get the word out from candidates, what they stand for, what they're about. And we just recently came from a very nice get together last week. So I like the activism of our group.
Terrific. All right, so that engagement, I'm going to go to who's labeled Annie Brown. Who's Annie Brown?
Yes, Annie Brown. We see that the part of the population, you know, that is growing is the 65 and older. And my vision and what I hope is that there will be more support to help that group stay in their homes or have a quality of life. You know, i.e. support for respite care for the elderly, so that if the caregiver needs to be away for a week to 10 days or that kind of thing, that it will be easier to find support and maybe sometimes some help with the support, because oftentimes you're paying to have help come in. And then, so it would certainly be helpful if there was some assistance in another place. Okay.
Great, excellent. So support for our seniors, our elders, to stay in their homes, and also support for their care networks. I'm going to go to our two friends on the iPad, and then I'm going to come up to Craig Carter. And then I think those will be our last two.
You've been
unless somebody else is jumping in, I would like to see composting become part of the county services. And I also agree with Rosie on the housing, affordable housing, because it's really hard for young people to move here and stay here with the housing so expensive. And I know from my neighbors who now will have 2 kids in a really tiny apartment.
Yeah.
So I'll be their in-house grandma, I guess, trying to help out.
Yeah, absolutely. So composting, when making sure that we're changing the way that we're dealing with our waste and doing it much more sustainably. And then again, housing issues. Mr. Carter, you get the last word in this round.
Well, to reiterate on Keiko, my iPad friend, housing issues for people with disabilities as well as the homeless. I think we need to take advantage of depleting malls and put the housing
idea.
together for homeless people. And we could
Very
put
good.
medical services there. We could support students
Good
that are
idea.
nursing and want to go into professions. We could put job training. Instead of taking those large spaces like North Bethesda, rezoning and putting in expensive housing, we need to balance the housing.
Absolutely. I
agree.
love this, getting creative with how we address our housing issues and how we're making use of our existing land, our existing building stock, and making sure that we are supporting our most vulnerable folks who have the most difficulty getting housing or getting housing that will support them, ensure that they can live well. So thank you for all of that. And, I think folks are hearing like there are some similarities. I saw a lot of folks when somebody else would mention part of their vision, nodding their head. Now, my next question, how do you all feel that we're doing as a county on the things that you mentioned, on these visions, the things that feel really important to you?
I feel we're so totally stagnated. We haven't gotten anywhere.
Okay, so around housing, around affordability, feels like we're stagnant.
And education.
And education as well. Feels like we're stagnant. Feels like some of the same issues that we were talking about in terms of equity, in terms of how our students are doing, we're still dealing with them maybe 10, 20, 30 years later. Other folks, our friend on the phone, were you going to mention something?
I agree with that. When I've had workmen come to my house to repair something, my refrigerator recently or whatever, none of them live around here, and they tell me they've driven over an hour to get to work here to get started on the day. So I think housing, reasonable housing, I know it's a difficult subject, but I don't know what the solution is, but it is a problem.
Yeah. So anyone else, how do you feel we're doing? A couple more people.
Well, let me just weigh in here and say that overarching is a concern about jobs and economic development. And we lag behind every neighboring jurisdiction, creating new jobs, a better community for Northern Virginia, for DC. And the only way we're going to be able to afford all the things that we would like to do is to have more revenues, and we need to have more jobs and more people, businesses. So that's a big pet peeve. It touches healthcare, it touches insecurity. We need to have more jobs.
Right. So our economy has to be strong enough to support the things that we want to have happen in our county. It has to be supporting enough people to do well so that they are contributing to that tax base. And I want to thank you all for sharing all of this, because so many of the things that you've mentioned are things that are actually really close to my heart. And when people ask me why I'm running for office, the answer is because we have these visions and have clarity about the things that we need in our communities, but we are not getting there in the ways that we need to. We are not getting there fast enough. We are leaving people behind. We are not actually able yet to get the solutions that we need to these problems that have been going on for a long time in our communities and have only become more pressing. And so a lot of times, and folks who've heard me at a campaign event before will hear me talk about the word power. We'll talk about building our power, community power. It's like my favorite word, probably the word that I use most frequently in the campaign. And the reason that I use this is because the definition of power is actually very simple. We have a lot of feelings about power, but the basic definition of power is our ability to act. It's our ability to achieve purpose. And I am running in the way that I do as an organizer, deeply rooted in community, because we need to increase our power to achieve the things that we just named. We need to organize effectively so that we can actually get affordable housing, and we don't have to be having this conversation again in another generation. We need to be able to organize effectively so that we can make sure that we do not have another generation where we are still talking about growing inequities around education, around the economy, around segregation in our county, as some of Sam's maps talked about. We want to make sure that as more and more and different kinds of people are moving into our county, that they are able to enjoy all the benefits of our county and be supported equitably to be here and to thrive, recognizing that we don't thrive as a county if any parts of our community are not able to thrive. And one of the things that I believe that I uniquely bring as a candidate is a lot of experience working with folks about how we shift the dynamics of power in our policy and our politics. Because right now, there are some people who are achieving their purposes and their visions in their county, but their visions and their purposes aren't currently matching our visions and purposes. And we need to shift the way that public policy is made, the way that politics is done, so that the voices of our community members and the people that we care about are at the center, not at the periphery of those conversations. It can't just be about us getting to have input on someone else's plan or vision that they've developed. It should be about us being at the center of identifying what the key issues are that we need to prioritize, where we can start building these creative solutions. And this is a group with tremendous experience in terms of not only being in our county, but in seeing how politics works out in Montgomery County, and a group that is ready and on fire to continue being active in moving us forward. And what I want to do as a candidate is to tap into that, to tap into this passion, these ideas, and be able to say, let's make that the basis and the heart of how we develop a legislative agenda in the county council. Is to be able to say, let's make conversations like this the center of how we identify what our priorities should be, who we need to be making sure that we are taking care of in our public policy. I'm a renter in Montgomery County, and so are all of my family members who live in Montgomery County. So affordable housing isn't a theoretical issue to me. It's the question of whether or not I can live here. My mother, who lives here in the county, who many of you have had a chance to meet, is in her 70s and has to deal with the fact that there are so many of our systems that do not adequately serve and support seniors to stay in their homes, to stay independent, to get access to the healthcare that they need, to be able to get around the county effectively. So when we talk about services and supports for elders in our community, that's not theory. That is whether or not my mom can be able to stay healthy and independent in her home. When we talk about the environment, this is something that I have spent my career working with folks to address environmental injustices and to look at how we actually shift the history of the way that different people have had access to wildly different environments, segregated by race and by class, and say that should not be. When I talk about the economy, it's from the perspective of someone who has been a wage worker, has worked in the restaurant industry, who has worked a lot of different jobs and knows what it is like to struggle to make sure that you can keep yourself housed and fed, to wonder whether or not you're going to have access to healthcare, whether you can go to the doctor, and to try and figure out how to navigate life when the way that we develop our economy doesn't support and value our workers. So that's the perspective that I come from. And I want to bring my lived experiences and your lived experiences into the center of public policy. And what I'm excited about is, like I said at the beginning, this is literally the work that I do. This is literally what I get to do for my day job, and I love it. Because what I get to do is talk with everyday folks about their priorities for a public policy, and then work with policymakers and say, hey, we are going to shift the dynamics of power to this. And these folks are going to be right at the decision-making table, developing environmental or climate policy or economic policy. And then having the experience of having that actually happen. Sometimes we hear that and it's like, oh, that sounds great. It would be really nice if that could happen. But I can tell you that I've gotten to do this work. I have colleagues who've gotten to do this work, and this is very possible. But it requires changing the way that we do business. It requires something like having a council member who doesn't stop being an organizer when she gets to the office, but says at the outset, what I want to do is be convening my groups of community members and supporting them and making sure we're doing that in ways that are accessible physically, accessible linguistically, accessible in terms of technology, and being able to say, let's get together and talk about what we need to be doing on housing, talk about what we need to be doing on waste management. And then from there, that's how we then go and say, this is the bill that I am then going to develop and put before the council and work with my colleagues to pass. I want to shift those dynamics, shift those processes, and make sure that at the end of my time on council, that we're not saying, I wish we could have these things, that we are able to celebrate that we have used our power to achieve these purposes in our community, and that we are no longer feeling stagnant and stuck. So I know we just have this hour together, so I'm going to pause there. There's a lot more that I could say, I love to say, but I want to make sure we have some time for folks to also ask questions of me about the things that you're thinking about.
Brandi, thank you so much. One of the questions we asked our guests is, if elected to the Montgomery County Council, which committee would you like to serve? Where do you think you'd bring most value?
Yeah.
Oh gosh, that's so, Fed, planning, housing, and economic development is certainly one of the areas where, in terms of both my background and my passions, that I'm really, really interested in. I think, I have some interest in shifting some of the ways that we look at committees like public safety or even education. And I want to be clear about this, that, there are limits to what the county council influences around education. And at the same time, there are a lot of ways that being in those spaces and being able to support community members to continue to advocate with our Board of Education and build these partnerships at the local and the state level about how we improve our education. There's still a tremendous amount of opportunity there, even though we don't have direct control over education policy. With public safety, there's actually a lot that we can be continuing to do around how we reframe public safety and use our public safety dollars very differently in order to actually achieve safety and security and full support for our community members. So I think, Fed would definitely be my top one, but there are a number of these other committees that I think are incredibly interesting opportunities for us to really shift the way that we are thinking about critical issues in our county.
Who else has got a question?
I have a
Okay,
question.
go ahead, Sandy.
Brandi, you mentioned a lot of different things, and I agree with you on all of them. So if you were on one of these committees, can you be kind of really concrete? We've talked about, I worked for the school system for many years, and we talked about back in the 70s when I started, equity issues, the same issues we're covering today, housing. If you can just pick one issue that you would work on, could you give us some ideas on some of the things you might recommend to implement, say, for example, affordable housing or improved transportation. And I know that's not really the job that you would be doing as a council person, but I'm sure you have lots of ideas on what would be the action steps you would take.
Yep. So I want to talk about housing as the number one issue raised by most people. So let's start there. And I want to, one of the things I want to highlight is that to address affordable housing, you need layers of policy. There is no single bullet policy. So when folks talk about blah, blah, blah policy doesn't work to, achieve affordable housing, if they're talking about that policy in isolation, no policy works in isolation. So I want to start with everything like making sure that we have good and strong renter protections and things like rent stabilization that helps people to be able to stay in their homes and not face extraordinarily rising costs of rent. I also want to be pairing that with looking at things like how we are using and helping to provide direction to the county government to take advantage of things like the county's first right of refusal on properties when they get sold in Montgomery County. The county actually has this ability to get in first anytime a property is being sold. And if we have the resources to be able to purchase that and then to be able to develop, that land around housing in a different way. This is a huge tool that we could be using to be able to take property and make sure that we can focus it on affordability. When we're doing incentives around development, how are we making sure that we are prioritizing our incentives around development so that if someone is getting public subsidy, if someone is getting a tax break, if someone is getting to build higher, that they have to be specifically focused on addressing affordability deeply, not at 15%, but at 50, 70, at the levels that we need to address things in our county. Making sure that we are looking at a combination of deeply affordable housing that can include everybody from folks making 30% of area median income to folks making 80 or 100%, that we are looking at permanently supportive, affordable housing for folks with special needs, disabilities, folks coming off of homelessness, that we are adopting housing first policy toward homelessness, recognizing that the number one thing that you need to do to help someone address all of the other things that contribute to their homelessness is give them stable housing. So there's actually, and again, I'm trying to get a couple of things in quickly so that you can see these are some of the concrete things that I would be really interested in focusing on around housing, that when we weave them together as a net of policy with the fundamental belief that housing should be a human right in our communities, that we are actually able to achieve true housing affordability and housing security for our people. So I hope that felt like a substantive answer.
Yes, it did. Thank you. I appreciate
You're
that.
welcome.
Another question?
I have to say that I really agree with, I really agree with you on the percentage of affordable housing, because we live in a development that has, I don't know, whatever, certain percentage, but it's not very much. And there's all kinds of space here, so it should be a lot more. If somebody gets a special deal on housing, they really need to have much more of the affordable housing units built. I'm totally with you there.
And I have a kind of a left field comment statement. When you brought up first right of refusal, is the county ever tried to get the land from White Flint to do something with it? Or is there something proposed for an actual development there? Because that would be a great place to put a lot of affordable housing in a great location.
Well, the last plan, as far as I know, the last big plan that we had for White Flint was Amazon HQ2. And again, the way that we were planning to do that, the way that we were planning to do that was in a great big giant tax giveaway that would put a huge infrastructure burden in the midst of our communities without any money to support all of the things that would that it would be required. So I think the county is still struggling with what exactly to do with this big parcel of land. And we need, this was why, Craig, I really appreciated that you're sitting there and you're thinking how do we look at these things in a really different way and not just say, we need some big developer or big corporate entity to come in and do this, and we're going to give away all of our public money to make it happen. There are lots of other kinds of solutions out there, And we need to be bringing the best solutions that are actually effective at achieving our shared public goals from across the country, from across the world, if we need to. We need to be looking at how people are doing social housing. We need to be looking at how people are doing community land trusts, cooperatives, all sorts of other things that are addressing these issues while also building the wealth of our communities and doing it in a much more collective way that ensures shared prosperity. So
That's the most important thing you have.
I like the
to do.
across the world.
You have to,
Sam,
you have to build your economic nest egg for the next step from renting to buying. Now, we have a lot of people who have been shut out of that process by who they are, where they come from, what have you. But if we can just concentrate, we're not trying to make amends for what we did to a group in the past, but allowing people to have the energy to have their own place, to work their own ways and make things beautiful for them. And they'd be beautiful for everybody.
Including
Yeah,
the east side of the county.
And I want to actually challenge this a little bit. I want to note that we have elevated single home ownership as the end all be all of our public policy and social goals. And I really want to remind us that that is not something that has necessarily been true for much of human history. It's not something that has been even true for much of the last century. And the way that we've done that has actually exacerbated economic and racial injustice. There are folks who want to own their own homes on separate land, and that's great. They should be supported to do that if that's what they want to do. There are folks who want to maybe own properly, but prefer to do it collectively, because that's what matches their values. That's what matches the way that they want to live. There are folks who don't want to own property, and they should not have fewer access to security and benefits in our communities because they don't prefer to be a property owner. We really, a lot of us have been trained, including myself, to buy into this notion that that is the end where we want folks to get to. And in doing so, the structures that we've created structures where if you are not on the path to that end, then you don't get what you need. And we really, really have to change that. So things like social housing, where people are, this is a model. The way that we've done it here in terms of public housing in the United States has been quite terrible, but it does not have to be that way. And there are ways of doing social, publicly owned and publicly controlled housing that provides people great places to live, and they don't have to worry about whether or not they have effectively built a nest egg for retirement or for the future generations, because you have a social safety net and good social services that mean that wherever you are, you're always going to have access to healthcare. You're not going to have to worry about housing. You're not going to have to worry about putting food on the table. You're not going to have to worry about education. That's my vision for the world. I do not want anyone to have to feel like if I couldn't or didn't prioritize building a financial nest egg, that I don't get to be a human being who lives with dignity at all the stages of our life. And that is the system that we have set up right now for our communities, and it is not working for us. And we have got to contend with that in terms of how we develop public policy.
Two more questions.
I would like to, Alan.
Go ahead, Pauline.
Okay, I would like to see something to combat loneliness in the very aging communities, in the very aging population. We talk about doing things for seniors, and there are many seniors living by themselves and very lonely. And I would encourage the type of building where you have units where people can share, and you have one central part, and you maybe have 4 or 5 people. You often read about this in other places. And I wondered how much of that is around in the county.
There are some examples of things like that. The term often used, something called co-housing, where you have sort of private living spaces, but a lot of your kitchen, laundry, other spaces are more in common. I absolutely agree with you. Though, again, and this is actually something that comes from us believing that our peak dream as Americans is to live sort of in social and geographic isolation. what that means is that then when you need community, it's harder to access. I actually really enjoy living in a multifamily condominium complex here in Kensington because there are people all around me and I don't have to worry about building my own pool. There's a pool that serves the hundreds of us who are residents and I love having that instead. I also live here because my sister and brother-in-law and my niece live in this same complex. So we get to have that community
That's nice.
where my niece is always running over to my house to come see me. And quite frankly, again, my mom, I think she wishes that she could be in this complex too, because then she gets to be supported by being around lots of different folks, whether, from kids to seniors and being in that community. So if folks want to live in those more separate housing, we should totally support that. There are ways we can support that. And I think we need to recognize that the way that we have atomized and separated and individualized housing contributes to a lot of folks, seniors and younger folks too, quite frankly, feeling very isolated and very lonely. And especially coming off of this pandemic, where we were literally told that it was dangerous to be around each other. We need to be doing some actual healing work in our communities about rebuilding our ability to connect with each other. And we don't usually talk about healing as a part of politics, but there are things we need to heal from. We need to heal from structural racism. We need to heal from the trauma of this pandemic, where so many people that we know have been sick and have died, and we have been separated from each other. That idea of centering healing and wellness as the goal of our public policy is tremendously important to our health as whole human beings, not just production units for capitalism, which also, by the way, like, we're not going to talk about capitalism versus other things right now, but I do want to note that is also one of the things that causes us to dismiss oftentimes both our seniors and our children, because if they're not like producing for our economy and the way that we tend to think about people as very disposable. If folks with special needs aren't producing in our economy the way that we think of that, we tend to think of people as very disposable and deserving of less care. And I think that's a deep fault in our society.
One last question, Commissioner Statland. Do you want to ask a question?
I just wanted to make a few comments. Brandi, I think your presentation was absolutely dynamite.
Thank you.
Dynamite. The county executive has put together a deal with Bomata, Black colleges, I think Howard University, maybe Morgan State, for a biotech center and technology training center for White Flint, and that has been introduced to Park and Planning this week. The proposal is for 5 buildings with commercial space on the bottom, residential at the top, and one other building, I guess, which would be used for education. I'm not sure what that is. So I know that Park and Planning is working on it, and that would be a use for White Flint. Secondly, Ben Kramer, at the urging of his sister Rona, introduced legislation and established a 1-800 number.
Right.
And that 1-800 number is very, very important for seniors who are living in homes, because they can call that number and they will receive a phone call as often as they want to receive it, where people are checking medication, food, transportation, getting to a doctor, et cetera, et cetera. Lots don't know about that. And thirdly, my pet project for years has always been mobile medical care, where we've out all of the communities to deliver health care, and mobile medical, for the most part, especially with the COVID, is going door to door. So if you know people that need help, especially seniors, and there are more people in this county over 100 years old than you could possibly believe. I just wanted to, I didn't want to interfere with Brandi, and probably should have kept my mouth shut. But again, Brandi, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Sam. And actually, as you raise these things, there's a point, and I think Hank made it earlier, about our civic engagement not just being about us as individuals getting involved, but being us as folks who are spreading the word in our communities about what's happening, about how we get involved. about what the resources are that are available to us, about, having these conversations about what are the things that we need and where can we have voice. This is critical for our communities. We need to make sure that we are engaging more and more people in understanding how this county works, what are the processes and decisions that are going on, where we can be deeply engaged, how we are spreading the word through our networks, where we are trusted people, where people look to us for information and for resources. We need to be equipping one another to be able to help serve that function and bring more folks into this network so that it's not just like a political class of 500 or 1,000 people who knows what's going on in a county of over 1 million, but that we have hundreds of thousands of people who feel empowered and engaged and able to shape our public policy and our politics to achieve purpose. And so I want to respect y'all's time. We're a little bit over 6. I want to note Frankie Santos Fritz, who some of you have also met, is my deputy campaign manager. And they've placed in the chat some information about how you can get engaged in this campaign. As Alan mentioned, we're at the halfway point. We've been running for 8.5 months. We have 8.5 months to go. So there's no better time to get involved, get engaged. We are using the Montgomery County Public Election Fund. Many of you who have been contributors to either my campaign or other people's campaign know how this multiplies our money power and helps allow candidates like me to remain accountable to folks like you instead of large money donors, instead of corporations.
I like that.
And we're inviting people to become our sustaining supporters, to be able to give, even if it's a small amount, even if it's, 10, 15, 20 or $25 a month on a monthly basis to the campaign, in order to help support our continued work of engaging with community members and getting folks excited and fired up about how we organize together to get the things that we need for our communities. It's such a pleasure. I really love getting a chance to come and talk with you all. Thank you, Alan, for the invitation and for all that you do to organize this group. And thank you again. I see so many of you in so many places around the county working hard to make sure that we are shaping what happens in our county. And I am deeply grateful for you.
Thank you so much, Brandi Brooks, and thank you so much, Commissioner Sam Statland, for your presentation earlier. A Progressive Legacy tries to bring to our members the best in public officials. So with that, we're going to end the meeting and we will continue our conversation online about our November meeting and who might be our guest. So thank you, everybody, for joining us this evening. We are adjourned.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Ellen.